Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. I'm sure many of you are looking forward to the weekend, and I decided to round off the week with a video that touches on a topic that I've been asked about over the years. It's actually one of the most popular questions I get as a tour guide, and it's become relevant because elections here in the United States are only 2 months away. The question, of course, is, Steve, why are the Jews so overwhelmingly, one could argue disproportionately, left-wing in their orientation? Now, in the last couple of weeks, there's been surveys published that say that 75% of the American Jewish voters plan to vote for the Democratic Party, as opposed to only 25% for the Republicans. And this is after a year in which Jews have been slammed publicly in bastions of the Democratic Party, such as the main urban centers of the United States, such as college campuses. Everyone would agree that America's major cities and college campuses are governed almost by monopoly by the Democratic Party, a Democratic Party that has not done much to speak out, or at least not, in my opinion, aggressively enough to take on some of the anti-Semites within their own ranks. And therefore, even after a year of incredible turmoil following the Hamas massacres of October 7th of this past year in 2023, Jews are still expected to overwhelmingly vote for the Democratic Party. So again, this beckons the question, Steve, why are Jews so overwhelmingly oriented towards the left in politics? Well, the answer may surprise some of my fellow Jews with how far back the origins of this pattern go. For it really begins back in 1789 with the French Revolution. The French Revolution was very different from the American Revolution in that it was the total overthrow of the old order of king, aristocracy, and church. Basically, the coming of a new secular order to replace the old order and regimes of Europe, again, king, aristocracy, and church, under which the Jews of Europe suffered. Under king, aristocracy, and state churches, the Jews were forbidden to have citizenship. You had to be a member of the national church to be granted citizenship. Jews were denied largely private property rights, were kept out of most careers other than famously money lending, and were also kept out of academia. But then comes the secular revolution heralded by the French Revolution. And wherever this secularism went, for the values of the French Revolution would be carried by Napoleon abroad to countries that he conquered. Jews were then liberated from the ghetto. They were now allowed to participate in society. They were now granted access to careers, and after many generations, eventually they would assimilate into the academy or academia in those countries. And of course, they would now be rewarded for the first time ever in countries that they had been living in for up to between 1,000 and 2,000 years. Citizenship for the first time would be granted entirely based as a secular notion of citizenship, not based on church membership or faith. And therefore, the French Revolution and the coming of secularism were seen to be as saviors of the Jewish people. Now, this is interesting. I'm not sure most of you know this, but the very terms left-wing and right-wing date back to the French Revolution. They hail from what was called the National Assembly, that first parliamentary assembly of the following the revolution in France, in which those who were sympathetic to the old regime of king, church, and aristocracy sat on the right wing of that National Assembly, whereas those that were fully behind the revolution and the overthrow of that old regime sat on the left side of that National Assembly. And thus begins the very concept, right wing, left wing. It starts in the French Revolution. Right wing, again, supporting the old establishment of king aristocracy and state church, left wing representing a break from those things and a passion for secularism. So it begins with the French Revolution, and this revolution, its values would reverberate for centuries throughout Europe. You can't understand modern day Europe and its social welfare state without understanding the French Revolution. But it would take even a more radical turn in 1917 with the Marxist Revolution in Russia. Okay, same thing there. You have a Jewish population that's suffering under czar and state church, in this case the Russian church, and communism comes to overthrow that old regime and replace it with a much more radical version of secularism than the French Revolution. So radical that communism would go to war with the church and eliminate much of what was left of it for the next 70 odd years of Russian history, okay, until the fall of the Soviet Union. So this is why Jews played a disproportional role, and I don't think this is a secret, this is well known, it's written in books, why Jews played a disproportional role in the Marxist revolution. Its leaders, of course, were not Jews. Stalin was not a Jew, but from Georgia. And Lenin, I've read recently in books that I've studied about that period of history, was maybe 1/4 Jewish, but it wasn't Jewish values or Jewishness or Judaism that fueled his passion for Marxism. It was apart from his 1/4 Jewish background, okay, but a lot of Jews saw the coming of Marxism as a similar savior to the French Revolution that occurred a century or so, a century and a half or so before. And this explains, or this is the beginning of the origins of the Jewish people's bent towards leftism and politics. And again, I'm not sure most Jews themselves know this. If I were to ask my fellow Jews, why do you think we're so left-wing as a people? Why so disproportionately left-wing as a people? I don't think most of them would know the origins of this. Now, that's the beginning of the story. And as Jews immigrated here to the United States, they brought that baggage with us to these new shores of North America, that trusting in secularism over churchism, I'll call it. I won't even say Christianity, but let's say churchism, aristocracy, the old order, which is seen in a negative light because it kept the Jews as second-class citizens, in fact, not as citizens at all, whereas secularism liberated the Jews from these dire circumstances, liberated us physically, liberated us intellectually. Now that's the origin, but there's even more to it than that, and I'll round off today's teaching with an update as to what fuels today's leftism of the majority of the Jewish people. Well, it can be still summed up as a suspicion of any sort of hint of religious Christian fundamentalism. See, you and I know, and I only know this from working for the last couple decades with evangelical Christians from the United States, that America's evangelical Christians are some of the most pro-Israel and most pro-Jewish people in American society. I know that because I've interfaced with that community. I make my living when I work as a tour guide, mostly from that community, and have met over the years thousands of evangelical Christians, and therefore it's become for me intuitive knowledge that American Christians are some of the best friends that Jewish people have. But most Jews have yet, or let me say most American Jews have yet to cross that Rubicon from suspicion of Christianity, suspicion of fundamentalist Christians believing, wow, their goal is to either convert us or, God forbid, to even kill us if we don't convert. This is recent enough history in Jewish Western and European history and Eastern European history to still be a factor in Jewish fears and suspicions. But it also comes down to the secularism of the Jewish people. Most of us are not religious. Most of us do not go to the synagogue. Most of us do not read the Bible. We are overwhelmingly a secular people, And even those of us that do attend synagogue attend what's called Reform synagogues, belonging to the Reform movement of Judaism, which began in Germany a couple hundred years ago under the founder of Reform Judaism, a guy by the name of Moses Mendelssohn. Okay, started. And Reform Judaism, for the most part, rejects the notion that the Bible is God-breathed. It believes that the Bible is basically just a repository of ancient Jewish wisdom and history books and writings, but it's not looked on or looked upon as a source of divine inspiration. So even the majority of us who go to the synagogue are not being taught or inculcated with faith in the Bible as the Word of God, but rather a different Torah, a Torah of progressive politics related to the Hebrew concept or notion of what's called tikkun olam. Tikkun olam in Hebrew means to fix the world. And the modern day secular Jewish notion of tikkun olam is to heal the world through progressive policies. It also puts a major emphasis on supporting the underdog, whoever that underdog is, and regardless of whatever role that underdog has played in their own underdoginess. So, for instance, you have Jews that support the Palestinian national movement, a movement that anybody who studies it and is open to the truth of what they study would know that it's genocidal in its intent towards the Jewish people and towards the Israelis. Palestinians seek nothing other than our mass murder. And yet you have Jews that support the Palestinian national cause. Why? Because they see them as underdogs. It doesn't matter why they are underdogs. It doesn't matter why the Palestinians were reduced to the current circumstances they're in as a defeated people in consecutive wars with Israel over their rejection of the Jewish national right to exist, or Zionism. What matters is that they're the underdog. And there's something about progressive politics, including within the Jewish world, that will support the underdog no matter what. Whether that underdog is culpable in their own underdoginess and suffering doesn't matter. They're the underdog. And for some reason, progressive politics elevates the underdog to a place of primacy, regardless of what led to their underdoginess. To review, Steve, why are the Jews so disproportionately left-wing? It goes back to the French Revolution, to the notion of secularism conquering or jettisoning the old regime of king aristocracy and church aside, those elements of society historically being the most anti-Jewish, and keeping the Jews as not even second-class citizens, but as non-citizens. With the rise of secularism and its replacement of church and king, Jews would thus go on to be liberated and to be allowed not only to receive citizenship, but to participate in all the other strata of society, business, private property ownership, and academics. That formative experience comes with the Jewish people as immigrants to the shores here of North America. And it's added to by a secularism that's conquered the Jewish people themselves, replacing the religion and the Torah of Moses with the new Torah of progressive politics after the fashion of Roosevelt's New Deal. Jewish people were some of the most passionate supporters of the New Deal, and similar social welfare programs that have followed since then. And progressivism in the form of what's called in Hebrew tikkun olam, fixing the world by way of progressive policies and progressive politics, has replaced a belief and fealty to the law of Moses, to the Torah, to the prophets as divine inspired writing. Our new religion, one of progressive politics, undergirded by a belief that this will lead to a better and just society, bending the arc of history to that messianic concept and world of a more just society. But one could, of course, argue that it's misguided and utopian, and the very word utopia or utopos in Greek means no place, because in reality, there is no such place as utopia. It doesn't exist. It's a fool's pursuit that often leads to unintended and sometimes tragic circumstances for society. Anyway, I hope that answered your question. Steve, why are the Jewish people so disproportionately oriented towards left-wing politics? Well, I hope I at least gave you the beginning of an understanding of the reason. And we'll see this in play in a couple months from now in the national elections, where again, 75% of us are projected to ultimately be predisposed to vote for the Democratic Party, and only 25% of us for the conservative Republican Party. Anyway, this is Steve, the tour guide, signing off. Bye-bye.